We're going to wrap up our look at the high Renaissance masters with Michelangelo. The artist is brooding genius. This characterization found a real home in Michelangelo. He was one of the few Renaissance artists from a family of some social position, and his desire to become an artist was met with stern opposition before he was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio for a short time. And this is probably where he learned his fresco technique. After his time with Ghirlandaio, he lived like a son with the Medici prince Lorenzo the Magnificent, who recognized his talent. He studied sculpture at this time under Bertoldo di Giovanni. When the Medici fell in 1494, Michelangelo sought out his own way, partly through studies of Giotto and Masaccio. Now, Michelangelo felt that the sculptor was most godlike. God created life from clay, and the sculptor unlocked beauty from stone. Michelangelo described his technique as liberating the figure from the marble that imprisons it. Measure and proportion must be kept in the eyes, he said, trusting his keen vision, not science, to fuel his art. In this sense, Michelangelo is diametrically opposed to Leonardo and other Renaissance masters. It is little wonder that Raphael accused Michelangelo of being alone like the hangman. In a world agog over science, Michelangelo's was an intuitive, creative spirit. While Michelangelo claimed no master, it is easy to see the influence of Leonardo's painting composition in his first masterpiece in sculpture, the Pietà. Done in Michelangelo's early 20s, the Pietà is a deeply religious theme which bridges the gap between classical art, as seen in the calm demeanors, and the mystical tendencies of Gothic art, seen in the powerful emotions. When this piece was first unveiled, a viewer attributed it to a more accomplished and older artist, unable to believe so young and unknown could accomplish this feat. Michelangelo then responded by carving his name in a ribbon across the Virgin's breast, and apparently this is the only work he ever signed. This incident is highly instructive, as his relations with patrons, which also meant boss, were at best strained throughout his life. An even more classical work by Michelangelo was his David, who's come a long way from his representation by Donatello. As opposed to antique classical artists, Michelangelo employed their methods to create a sense of power as opposed to mere beauty. The single piece of marble that this was carved from was known for its size and difficult shape. In fact, the stone was thought to have been worked on without success by two artists before Michelangelo. It has been suggested that David symbolizes Florentine defiance against aggressors. Remember, Rome has taken the banner of Art Center away from Florence. As opposed to appearing beautiful, as he does in Donatello's work, David almost looks surly here. He's got enough attitude to do the job. In Michelangelo's greatest disappointment or annoyance lay some of his greatest works. Pope Julius II conceived of and commissioned from Michelangelo a great tomb for himself to be the centerpiece of a rebuilt St. Peter's Cathedral. Originally to be a mammoth two-story structure with 40 life-size figures in sculpture, Michelangelo was tormented for 40 years as the Pope and then his relatives whittled down the original scale of the project and gave Michelangelo numerous distracting projects along the way. Michelangelo, in fact, viewed the Sistine Chapel painting as a distraction, as it was one of the projects which prevented him from realizing a sculptor's and architect's dream. The power of the individual figures to be included in this tomb suggests it would have been most impressive. As magnificent as the creation of Adam is as a single painted image, it cannot touch the awe-inspiring nature of the ceiling fresco series to which it belongs. Imagine, then, this Moses as part of a Sistine in stone. Michelangelo's power and rage manifest themselves in this tremendous work, connected to what Michelangelo referred to as the tragedy of the tomb. Moses is a powerful, poised figure, not all tensed, a common mistake like we saw in Pollaiuolo's Battle of the 10 Naked Men. With Moses, Michelangelo almost creates a sfumato in stone. The dying slave that we see here was to be one of 20 slaves intended for the tomb. While works such as this are thought to represent the prison that the human body is to the soul, they may represent more specific ideas. The rebellious slave that we see here is also referred to as the bound slave. Works such as this may have been Michelangelo's slightly underhanded manner of making reference to himself in his dealings with what he no doubt deemed unreasonable patrons or bosses. It's a good thing he was such an incredible artist, as lesser men would not have gotten away with basically cursing the Pope in that time. Michelangelo is an interesting study in contradictions. He was an impossible, irascible man whose life's work served to glorify God. Perhaps this contradiction as well manifests itself in his many studies of slaves, for he was a slave to his art. While Michelangelo saw himself as a sculptor, perhaps his greatest accomplishment was as a painter, doubly ironic in that the Sistine Chapel ceiling fresco kept him from working on the tomb. The colossal project of the Sistine Chapel is remarkable, yet many people only know the finished images, such as we see here. Many incredible preparatory studies prefigured the work. Michelangelo was an incredible draftsman, not an unusual thing for a sculptor, as their analysis of form and ability to translate from the three-dimensional world to the two-dimensional plane, those observations is a frequent characteristic of sculptors. Many people are also unaware of the fact that Michelangelo's decoration, if you will, of the Sistine Chapel ceiling was not the first. Look at the ceiling here in this drawing, and you'll see that it was not the original application of paint to the surface of the ceiling. So Michelangelo, like Raphael, came in and significantly improved on a previous artist's work. Impressive as well were the physical conditions and problems to be conquered here. The ceiling itself was nearly 10,000 square feet and about 7 stories high. That is indeed quite a commission. Now, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the work now apparent to us is that a sculptor could be a tremendous colorist. A remarkable unveiling occurred in the 20th century, the late 20th century, allowing us to see these works as Michelangelo did them. Now you look at this particular painting and you'll see the stages of cleaning that result in this beautiful vibrant color in the lower right hand corner that again lets us see what had not been seen for hundreds of years. This is wholly unlike how we are still forced to deal with a Mona Lisa who bears no resemblance to past descriptions of her beauty and coloration. This restoration, however, is still controversial. A number of art historians believe that they've gone too far and removed too much, but the vibrancy of the color, I think, stands in defense of the historians and the conservators' work. Three incredible triumphs are apparent in the creation of Adam, which makes it one of the most exciting images of the ceiling. First off, the dynamic off-center composition that will point away from the stable masses sought out by Leonardo and Raphael. And this is going to have a dramatic effect on artists to come. Secondly, the triumph of the color. Beautiful, glowing, warm greens and fabulous violets in the shadows and the flesh. Contrast these with the colors on some of the overall views that I showed you previously, and again you'll get a sense of the remarkable unveiling that's taken place here. For a sculptor, Michelangelo is a pretty good painter. The transparency, in fact, of God's robe is fabulous. And a third major point to make about this is the triumph of the nude figure over the face to convey emotion. These twisted figures are at the pinnacle of figure painting, and the head is not needed to communicate the message. Michelangelo differs from Leonardo in that he doesn't just twist the figure for the formal variation it brings. He uses the device to make clear his intentions and ideas of a more spiritual nature. Here's another painting from the Sistine Chapel ceiling, where we see the temptation on the left side of the screen and the expulsion from the garden on the right side. One particular thing to notice in this painting is the way the faces have changed. On the left side, they're pure and innocent, and on the right side, they have been transformed into almost bestial beings. Before we move on to Michelangelo's work as an architect, let's jump forward 20 plus years to close the book on Michelangelo the painter. Michelangelo returned to the Sistine Chapel to undertake the theme of the Last Judgment. This was an incredibly gloomy work, and Michelangelo chose to echo the chaotic nature of the world at that time through what no doubt will be a moment of great tumult. In this painting, nearly 400 figures struggle, fight, and fall into hell. Christ is not the merciful Redeemer here, but the avenging judge that Michelangelo perhaps identified with. So striking was Michelangelo's vision of this moment that Pope Paul III fell to his knees when he saw the fresco, crying out, "Lord, hold not my sins against me." Even as the resurrected ascend into heaven, there is no sense of relief as seen in the lower left portion of the fresco. We can imagine Michelangelo at this point as a bitter man saying, "I'll give them what they want." Michelangelo's later years were dedicated primarily to architectural concerns. His lifelong infatuation with the human figure continued to manifest itself in his architecture as he strove to reflect his sensibilities of design worked out in his sculpture and painting in the practical application of architecture. Michelangelo believed the ends of architecture are derived from the limbs of man. Now, the symmetrical arrangement manifests itself in most, if not all, of Michelangelo's projects in architecture. Here we see Michelangelo's tomb of Giuliano de' Medici. And Michelangelo's view of architecture as merely an extension of his other concerns in art, notably sculpture, enabled him to fuse sculpture and architecture once again in a way not previously seen in the Renaissance or post-Gothic period. The Medici funeral chapel is a perfect example of his fusing the two arts. Without the sculpture, the architecture would seem an empty, lifeless design, and no doubt the effectiveness of the sculpted figures would be greatly diminished, removed from their architectural setting. The figures are all representative of larger concepts. Night and day flanking Giuliano, who is actually not a portrait. It's a type merely. Michelangelo, in fact, disdained portraiture. Additionally, the tomb is far more effective in its interior setting, which you miss seeing here. Michelangelo, the architect, was like Michelangelo, the painter or sculptor, in that he did not follow rules for the sake of following rules. This is the vestibule of the Laurentian Library, and no doubt this interior, unlike any we've seen previously, would have had Alberti spinning in his grave, with the double columns recessed into the walls, and other peculiarities. These columns appear to support nothing, and appear to be themselves supported by the slender volutes below, yet they do contribute greatly to the structural integrity of the room. Michelangelo sought to solve practical problems in an innovative manner which pleased his eyes, not his mind, or the minds of others for that matter. It's a rather impressive interior, any way you look at it. Michelangelo's love of symmetry shows up in his daring solution to an inherent design problem at Capitoline Hill. His problem was that of redesigning this ancient hill into a papal showpiece, yet integrate two pre-existing buildings set at an odd angle. His solution was to throw another building in at that same angle and unify the space through symmetry. Again, this was a triumph of sight over reason, as reason would not have accepted the two buildings set at 80-degree angles to one another as a logical design premise. This is the Palazzo dei Conservatori, and redesigning the facades of the one existing building to match that of the building to face it was Michelangelo's one concession to the difficulty of his task. Michelangelo also applied one Albertian idea where it suited him, that of using columns to support lintels, as opposed to the arches of classical antiquity, which were despised by Alberti. Particularly successful here is his use of pilasters to tie the two stories of the building together into a cohesive whole. For more on Michelangelo's work as an architect, look at his work on St. Peter's, following up on Bramante's design, and Raphael's work as well, which would be completed by Giacomo della Porta some years after Michelangelo's death. What are we left with, then, as we leave Michelangelo the Titan? An enormously influential artist in spite of himself.